Your Worship, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, good evening to you all. As Vice-Chancellor of Brunel University, I'm, as ever, delighted to be able to welcome you all here tonight for the fourth inaugural lecture of the 2011 series. Since we relaunched inaugural lectures in 2007, they've served a dual purpose. One, to celebrate the diversity of research work that goes on within the university, but also to showcase it to our visitors from outside of the university. And they are conventionally, routinely, and always very successful occasions. Now, tonight's lecture will be given by Professor Christina Victor, who joined Brunel in October 2009 as Professor of Gerontology and Public Health in the School of Health Sciences and Social Care. And I was on her appointments panel, so it's my fault. She's also director of the doctorate program in public health, that's our DRPH, and she is the program director of health aging within the Brunel Institute for Aging Studies, which is called BIAS. Now, Christina previously held professorial posts at both Reading University and St George's Hospital Medical School, which are both prestigious institutions in their own right. Christina started her academic career as a geographer with a particular interest in spatial distribution of health and illness and access to and provision of health and social care. She has a BA in geography from Swansea University and an MPhil in medical geography from Nottingham University. It was whilst working at the medical school in Cardiff that she developed her interest in gerontology and public health. Christina obtained her PhD from the Welsh National School of Medicine, and her thesis investigated outcome after discharge for older people in Wales. Christina is, like me, an academician of the Academy of Social Sciences, but unlike me, she is a fellow of the Faculty of Public Health. Her major research interests are in old age and the use and evaluation of health services for older people. She has a particular interest in social relationships in later life and the experiences of aging amongst ethnic minority elders. Christina has recently completed an ESRC-funded project called Families and Caring in South Asian Communities, along with her colleague, Wendy Martin. She has also recently commenced a Dunhill Medical Trust-funded research project called Bridging the Gap Between Policy and Practice, Dignity in Care for Older People, along with Wendy Martin, Veronica Williams and Debbie Cairns, but also with colleagues from Southampton and Oxford Brookes universities, and also with the current elderly czar, or should be the czar for the elderly, who is Professor David Oliver. Now, this study aims to investigate how dignified care for older people is understood and delivered by the health and social care workforce, and how organisational structures and policies can promote and facilitate, or of course hinder, the delivery of dignified care. In March-April 2011, along with Wendy Martin and Vanessa Berholt of Swansea University, she started a new project investigating caring among minority communities, and this was funded by the Leverhulme Trust. Christina is also working with colleagues from St George's, South London, on 3 studies investigating, first of all, the health effects of bereavement, secondly, a trial to increase exercise among older people, and thirdly, increasing exercise uptake in midlife adults. She's also involved in a project investigating falls in mental health settings and integrating working between primary care and care homes led by the University of Hertfordshire. Christina has written over 200 journal articles and book chapters and has published 8 books in the field of gerontology. Her most recent book, Aging, Health and Care, was launched by the Polity Press at the British Society of Gerontology Conference, which was held here at Brunel in July 2010. In addition to this, Christina is editor-in-chief of the journal Aging and Society. This is the leading journal of social gerontology in the UK. And believe me, editing a journal is a considerable feat. She is also a member of the ESRC Grant Assessment Panel on Sociology and Social Work and various National Institute for Health Research grant awarding panels, as well as a council member for the Academy of Social Sciences. As if that wasn't enough, outside of work, Christina is a keen swimmer, which I'm sure she's going to tell us something about today. And she competes, in the loosest sense of the word, in masters swimming and open water swimming events, as well as in coaching and officiating. Each year, she also runs the London Marathon. It's deeply depressing, isn't it? Her best time is 3 hours, 42 minutes, which is only an hour and a half slower than Paula Radcliffe. But she doesn't have a full-time job. Right. And every year she says she's never going to do it again, but she'll be there on the start line 2012. I do have to say as an aside to this that I always get extremely worried when I see that my senior academics have time for a private life. Now, with retirement looming for me, I'm particularly interested in what Christina has got to say about life after 65, particularly in relation to relationships and exercise and so on. So, your worship, ladies and gentlemen, it now gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Christina Victor, to deliver her lecture, provocatively entitled, Broken Down by Age and Sex, Growing Old in the 21st Century. Thank you.
I kind of almost feel as if I should quit now while I'm ahead. So, first of all, thank you very much to the audience for turning up. I figured that if I put sex in the title, at least somebody would turn up. This comes from when I used to teach medical students. It was the only way I could get them to come to any of my lectures. And you seem to have fallen for the ploy as well, so that's good. So, first of all, I less frivolously must say it's a personal pleasure and an honour to have been invited to give this lecture, but in the spirit of bias and Brunel, I'm also taking this as recognition of the importance that the university attaches to the work of the Brunel Institute for Aging Studies, so bias. So my colleagues can bask in the reflected glory, hopefully, or else see me afterwards and correct my many and varied failings. But I think it is important to acknowledge that Brunel is one of the few centres that are significantly involved in ageing research in the UK. And as a group, I think it's a great pleasure to be able to acknowledge and appreciate the support that we're given by the university for our research in what is often a marginalised and unsexy subject. So we're grateful, we're very grateful for that. And I hope in the next 35 or 40 minutes to be able to at least not send you to sleep, perhaps excite you, share with you my enthusiasm for the study, and perhaps make you think a bit about the role of old age and older people in contemporary society. So I have a presentation of two halves, but not equal. I thought this is a good opportunity for me to spend a little time sharing my academic journey with you. It is a public platform to be able to acknowledge the help and support that many people have given to me during my academic endeavours, and it's a pleasure to be able to do that. So first of all, I want to share a little bit about how do you get from an obsession with swimming and a geography degree from Swansea to being interested in old age and later life. And in the second part, I want to present some of the areas of work that I've been involved in over the last few years, and to raise perhaps some issues for discussion afterwards about ageing and later life. So the first part of my presentation is entitled From Grays to Gerontology. So that's how did I get from here. This is Grays in Essex, if anybody has heard of it. If you've been over the Dartford River crossing or you've been to Lakeside Shopping Centre, you've been to Grays. So think less sophisticated version of The Only Way is Essex, okay? So how did I get from here to here? And I want to do this to share with you the confession that I am an Essex girl. I'd like you to take a little time reading this. This is my best joke of the evening. I thought I'd get it in first so you'll be on my side. So I was born in Essex, in a rather unprepossessing part of Essex, down by the river. This is my house, that's there, and that's me at 12 weeks. My son was very surprised by this because I didn't have any glasses on. He was most unsure that it was me. And I was, so this is where I started. Not a particularly prosperous area, and perhaps not born into a family or the type of area where perhaps one might have thought one day I'll end up being a university professor. And indeed, one of the things I'm very passionate about is about widening access. I was a complete, utter and dismal academic failure. I failed my 11 plus so drastically that it was in 2 parts in Essex. They wouldn't even let me take the second part. I was completely hopeless. And I was very poor until I discovered swimming. So how does this work, you ask yourself? Well, 2 things happened. I found that I was good at something, and it's really encouraging for children and young people to find something that they're good at. And also because those of you who go to public swimming baths will notice they have big clocks on the wall that we use for training. And I discovered that I couldn't see the clock. And after my swimming coach had assumed that I was being the normal Essex yob, actually people realised I couldn't actually see anything. So I was very short-sighted. So these 2 things in combination changed my life. The belief of a swimming coach that actually I had some talent. And I was going to go to Loughborough University on a swimming scholarship. And my parents went to parents' evening one day, and one of my tutors made an offhand remark about, well, maybe Christina should apply for university. And I think it's the only time I can ever remember my father nagging me all the way home, all over the side. Why don't you apply for university? I just thought, oh, for goodness sake, you know. And so just to keep him quiet, I applied for university. I got 4 rejections because my predicted grades were dire. But one admissions tutor at Swansea University must have clearly thought, oh, well, we can offer her a place. There's no chance she'll come, and it'll look good on the stats. And as they say, my choice of universities was selected by the rigorous academic criteria of swimming pool on campus and proximity to the beach. And I was still set to go to Loughborough when, like all students, I was invited to an open day at Swansea, and I went down. Now, those of you who have stereotype views about Wales will be shocked to realise that the day I went, the sun shone. Okay? I know it's hard to believe. This is Swansea Bay. And I went down to Swansea, and there were all the students sitting on the beach, and I thought, East Midlands town or beach? That's a hard one. So I managed to find the motivation to get to university. And the rest, they say, is history. And I'm forever grateful to whoever that admissions tutor was for giving me the opportunity to go to university. And so from then, via a circuitous route, I ended up studying, getting interested in gerontology. And again, this was a serendipity. I finished my MPhil, and I needed to find a job. And I wish I could say that I chose to study gerontology. I didn't. I just needed a job, having exhausted all options of state funding. I realised I had to actually support myself. I went to the medical school in Cardiff, got the job, and I'm very grateful to Norman Vetter, who was my research group leader, who gave me that opportunity. He never ceased to tell me that I only got the job because I was the only applicant, but anyway, that's a different issue. And I fell in love with gerontology, and what I hope I'll be able to do this evening is to demonstrate to you why I think it's not just relevant to us all personally, it's not relevant just in policy and practice terms, but it's an intellectually exciting and interesting area. And I would at this point like to take the opportunity to thank the many colleagues who have supported my career over the years. It's invidious in some ways to pick people out, but Norman Vetter, I think, I'm very grateful to. There are a range of colleagues that I've worked with, particularly I think Anthea Tinker has been a great supporter of mine, and I'm would like to take the opportunity to say that. I'm very grateful and appreciative of the support from the bias group here. I think we have a very good group, and I've learned a great deal from working with these people, and I hope that in my relationships with the staff who work with that I can be as supportive as them as other people were to me. And I will thank all of my colleagues at George's, at Reading, at Brunel, and the various other places I've worked who've tolerated my indulgence in marathon running. That's a medal from the first ever London Marathon. And this is me contemplating swimming 200 metres butterfly in October with a hangover. Never a good combination. But I think it's important that perhaps all of us as senior academics need to support and develop staff who are following behind us, engender our enthusiasm for our subject, and create the next generation of academics. And I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to say that formally. So that's the polite bits over. I'll talk a bit about what is gerontology. I want to talk a little bit about what gerontology is, what ageing is, and then a little bit about our research. So gerontology is very broadly the study of ageing and less strictly later life. And it's a relatively recent academic discipline, although, as I will show you in following slides, human beings have always been interested in ageing and what it is and how to prevent it. And gerontology is a truly multidisciplinary enterprise. No one academic discipline owns or can understand completely the process of ageing. So to completely understand the experience of ageing in later life, we need to integrate biological, psychological, and social perspectives. And my particular field of interest is in social gerontology, which is fairly even more recent than gerontology itself, and effectively the kinds of questions that I've spent the last 25 years thinking about, thank you to the taxpayers amongst you who've supported that enterprise, has been to look at what is the experience of ageing? What's it like to be an older person in contemporary society? How does that differ from being an older person, say, 50, 100, 200 years ago? To think about the position of older people in society and how we value them, and particularly I'll come back to the issue of dignity in care and how we care for and treat older people at the end, and also about the social consequences of ageing. When I started out, I was quite interested in population ageing. I've done work on retirement and pensions. I've given that up now because there are no pensions and there won't be any retirement, so there doesn't seem a great deal of a point in studying that. So those are the kinds of questions that myself and colleagues have been interested in studying. So I can't really get away from at least introducing the idea of what ageing is and some of the issues. Here we have a sort of description of the process. It's normal, inverted commas, changes that occur in biologically mature individuals and loss of adaptability. There are all sorts of questions in the biology of ageing, and I'm not going to stray into that territory. There are people who are better qualified than I in the room to think about it. But actually, there's a lot we don't know about ageing. How do we distinguish ageing from pathology? Is ageing a disease? Is dementia a normal part of ageing? But here you can see this is Dr. Nirdosh here. This is her, who has her own particular view that not only is ageing a disease, but if you consult her, use her diets and creams, you'll definitely look like that. The men in the audience may not want to, but... So we don't know much about... It's difficult to... Ageing is a difficult subject, and we don't entirely know what causes it. I seem to have lost the slide here, but let's go back. Okay. I was going to... I had in the interests of keeping my audience happy and not contravening the Trades Descriptions Act, had a description of Aristotle's suggestions for what causes aging. So as the slide seems to have gone AWOL, I'll read it for you. So Aristotle suggested that sexual abstinence, abundance of flesh, being a woman, a moist climate, and all contribute to a long life. So tick all of those that apply or don't. So whilst gerontology is a new academic discipline, you can see there's a long historical thesis about what causes aging. Lots of people have their own views. And there's certainly, we spend a lot of our time as gerontologists and academics interested in aging, thinking about, well, we need to understand aging more and arguing for why aging should be a research priority. Here you can see Roger Bacon, who was writing in the 13th century, making the same kind of arguments. We need to understand old age. We need to understand the natural history of old age if we are to be able to cure it. This is a gripping little read called The Cure of Old Age and Preservation of Youth, which, thanks to the jolly wonders of the internet, you can just download and read. So you don't even have to go to the library. And again, we have another writing from 1633 saying, to live forever is a thing impossible, and maybe that's something we can debate later on. But to prolong a man's life free from violent sickness, to keep the body in a temperate state, I believe may be done. So there's lots of precedents for why we're interested in understanding aging. So what prevents aging? How can we stop aging? Well, Aristotle's was an environmental suggestion. You need to live somewhere that's warm and moist. You need to be slightly overweight, and you need to be a woman. I couldn't possibly comment. Roger Bacon here is quite contemporary in some of the things he says, that in order to prevent aging or to rejuvenate from it, you need good nutrition, regular exercise, but I'm not sure where you get the breath of a virgin from, but you know, the NHS I think is quite accommodating. So we see in his writings a lot of the discourse that's around healthy aging, how to promote a long and healthy life. I think the only thing he didn't have was smoking. And down here we have a very early manifestation of a very popular thesis of delaying aging is this idea of calorific restriction, that if you basically don't eat anything, you'll live a long time. May not be a very happy life, but so there's a lot of interest in nutrition as a way of promoting long life. And you can see here, this is all Aubrey de Grey's book on ending aging. There's a lot of historical, but also a lot of contemporary interest in how to promote a long and healthy life, some of which has good scientific basis. And some of these down here, this is, I don't know how well you can read this, this is Egyptian magic cream, which will remove wrinkles and make you live longer. And these are multivitamins. These are available on the internet. And so one of the things I think that's difficult perhaps for journalists and a lay audience is to distinguish the vigorous science from the quackery and from the quackery and unsupportable regimes that people may use to live a long life. So that's another way of saying that we still need to understand a lot more about the process of aging, what promotes healthy aging, and what are the factors that we can manipulate to ensure that people live a long, healthy life. However, you'll be pleased to know I have the solution for you. Now, this is a piece of work that I really rather like, which says that habitual swimmers are biologically up to 20 years younger than their actual age. So I think that makes me about 25. Here I must have been about 5. For those of you who are experts in swimming, you'll be able to, this is me when I was much younger. You can see no goggles, black and white photographs. Sadly, my starting technique is as bad now as it was then, and my right hand on my butterfly stroke is still rubbish. despite 30 years of additional practice. So here you are. This is all you need to do. You need to go swimming every day in Hillingdon Pool, and you'll live a long and healthy life. I think this issue about promoting healthy life, healthy ageing, does raise some interesting ethical and moral dilemmas, which I don't have time to go into tonight, but perhaps raise with you now. In 500 BC, Euripides wrote, "I hate men who would prolong their lives by foods and drinks and charms of magic, perverting nature's course to keep off death. They ought, when they no longer serve the land, to quit this life and clear the way for youth." So but of course, Euripides was only talking about men, so we're all right, girls. Okay, so there are interesting issues. How long should we strive to promote life for? And the contrary argument, we had Baroness Warnock fairly recently causing something of a stir, that saying old people with dementia have a duty to die and should be pushed towards death. So clearly issues around life extension, how actively we should seek to extend life, pose contemporary society with some interesting challenges which perhaps we have not debated as thoroughly as we should. And the reason why we need to do it is because of this. There have always been older people in society, and you notice I have not yet defined what that is. We have biblical references of people with very long lives. There are all these obscure valleys in bits of Russia and South America where people live forever, but there have always been older people. This is a guy called Tom Parr, who died allegedly at the age of 152 years and 9 months. This is his picture. Now, it's highly unlikely, and in fact, Harvey, who wrote about the circulatory system, did the autopsy of Tom Parr, and you can read it online, again, due to the wonders of the internet. Parr was probably about 70 when he died. There were two people with the same name, so they just kind of carried on seamlessly. So there have always been old people. This is my great-great-grandfather. I don't know how well you can see it. He's got an immense beard. It's really impressive. So there have always been older people around. But what characterises contemporary society is the absolute and relative number of older people in both the developed world and the developing world. You're very fortunate in I'm only allowed kind of 40 minutes to talk to you this evening, because I could talk on my pet subject for about 4 hours. But we need to remember that ageing is taking place in the developing world, and is taking place at a much more rapid rate than it did in the Western world. So it took France around about 150 years to go from 6% of the population aged over 60 to about 12%. Some of the South Asian countries, Korea, etc., are doing that transformation in about 15 or 20 years. So very rapid transformation in terms of the population structure of developing countries that perhaps sometimes we don't think about. We don't think of it as being an issue that affects the developing world. So we then are left with, if we are talking about old age, how do we define old age? At what age does an adult, these are pictures of my father at various ages. This is in 1941, and this is where's it gone? Okay, it's gone completely. The far right was in about 1999. So at what point along that trajectory of his long life did he go from being midlife to old age? And this is a quandary that we all face. This is from the Peanuts cartoon, saying, what's your grandpa been doing lately? He's been trying to solve one of the great mysteries of life. Why is he older now than people he used to think were old? So it's a very, using chronological age to define different categories, be it youth, be it midlife, be it old age, is, we do it, but it has its problems. It's age just records the number of years you've lived. We use it as a surrogate for biological aging, but we have to remember it's culturally, temporally, and historically mediated. So this is Casanova lamenting on his old age at the grand old age of 47. Now, in 1821, that wasn't a bad innings, but it is important that the ages that we use to define particular phases of the life course are variable. So this is from the European Social Survey, which has just been published. Never let it be said that we kick a country when they're down, but Greece just happens to be on the extreme here. In Britain, we thought old age started at 59, whereas in Greece they thought it started at 68. So clearly they don't need their pensions at 59 then, whereas we obviously do. Okay, so when we use terms like using the age of 60 to define old age or 70 or whatever it is, we need to understand what we're saying. We're making inferences that are appropriate for the time in which we're making them, but perhaps we just need to be aware of the context. Okay, why are we interested in ageing? Well, partly because I think it's really interesting, but this, of course, is the context for a lot of the debate about population ageing. You can see this is England. We've taken the population age 60. It could equally have been 70 or 80. You get the same distribution. It's roughly stable, give the odd bit of epidemic, pestilence, plague, and the usual hazards of pre-industrial life. And then we can see the percentage goes up such that now around about 25% of the population are aged over 60. And so this is one of the reasons why there's much more interest in ageing now. And of course, in the next decades, these percentages are going to go up and we're going to have more people in the 80s and 90s because we're all here. And I'm dead hoping that I'm going to get to be 90 because I reckon that I can get the world record for 200 metres butterfly. If I can only live to be 90, it's there for the taking. But I've got to make sure a few people slip in the shower along the way. Okay, so, and having people of very old age now is not surprising. You can go into the card shop and buy cards for people who are 90 or 100. So this is why perhaps politicians, practitioners, policymakers get so vexed, is the fact that there are so many more. But whilst we acknowledge that there are some challenges of an ageing population, it is worth reminding ourselves as to why our population is ageing. There are a number of reasons. People are having fewer children, so if you have fewer children, by definition, you're going to have more older people. But we must, I think, remember where this has come from. Mortality rates, these are mortality rates generally, have halved. So the reason we have more people getting to be old is because they're not dying, and in particularly, they're not dying in childhood. And I think population ageing is a triumph of public health, and we should never forget that that's where it came from. And whilst we should not become complacent about the infrastructure and the public health interventions that have meant now around about, 1% at the most children die in the first year of life. And that, of course, is a personal tragedy for those parents. But in population terms, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 15% of children would have died in the first year of life, and 35% before their 5th birthday. And that's one of the major reasons why we have population ageing. So if you don't want an ageing population, simple. Okay, so it's worth reminding ourselves. And what this really means for individuals is that you can see this is life expectancy. These are my grandparents. This is my maternal grandparents. These are my paternal grandparents. That's my mum. These guys, none of whom I ever knew, were born in the 1880s. So their life expectancy was around about 45, 46. These people did better, these people didn't. So we now have a life expectancy of around about 80 years. And for the cohort born in 2001, as I say, it's around about 80 years. And the age at which 50% of the cohort will still be alive will be, if current trends continue, will be 85. So it now means that most of us can live a long life. Most of us take for granted the fact that we have grandparents and great-grandparents. So there have been lots of changes resultant from these increases in life expectancy. The message I would like you to take home from this are two. You can see the differential between men and women. Well, so there's the sex again, more correctly gender. Why do women live longer than men? Well, we can discuss that. Nothing to do with biological superiority, of course. Men tend to do dangerous things like smoke and drive motorbikes, but women are now taking these up. But we have to remember that, like your stocks and shares, life expectancy can go down as well as up. And I would draw your attention to two contemporary examples of that, one of which is Russia, where with the breakdown of the communist system, whatever you think of the communist system, they had a very good public health service. Life expectancy has gone down about 8 years for men. And in Zimbabwe, life expectancy has halved. So from having one of the longest life expectancies in Africa, around early 60s, it's now down to around the early 30s. So the message we take home from that whilst biology is important, your biological inheritance, your genetic inheritance is played out within a social, environmental and political context. And if you don't have access to clean water, if you don't have access to enough food, then the chances of living a long life are much less than other settings. So I want to move on. We talk a lot about ageing, and a lot of my work has been around thinking about the activities and images of ageing. And this is just put up to show you that there are always positive images of ageing. This is Willy van Rijssel, who was a very successful swimmer. This is Fallujah Singh, who took 8 hours, 25 minutes and 55 seconds to run the Toronto Marathon at age 100. And also here we have, these are Grannies for Peace, being active citizens, and I'm not sure whether this is active or not, but this is actually the world's oldest suicide bomber. So we have older people who are actively engaged in society, who are participating, who are doing the same kinds of things as the rest of us. But regrettably, most of the image we have about old age and later life are negative. And we attribute the stereotypes that we have about older people to older populations. So we assume that because we have an old population, it will be not able to innovate, not able to develop new initiatives. So this is something, I think, which summarises perhaps many of the issues that older people are rather uninteresting, ill, forgetful, and are a burden, so to individuals and to their family. And stereotypes are quite fun, but they also have a downside. This is a quotation from Dr. Johnson, essentially saying that when a young person forgets something, we don't think anything of it. If an older person forgets something, well, we just go, well, what do you expect at their age? And those are powerful messages that we send, both to older people, not to perhaps think about their health as much as they should, that they put down to ageing signs and symptoms which could be perfectly well managed, and similarly to the healthcare professionals who treat older people. If they take the view of that's articulated in this quotation here, if an older person comes to consult, then they won't refer them, they won't treat them, or will treat them in a suboptimal way. And the other thing we do to older people is infantilise them and take away their autonomy. and assume that these people who up to the age of 60 or 65 or 70 or 75 have been capable, engaged, active citizens, that once they reach this magic chronological age, that they will be no longer able to control their own destiny here. So here you're saying that this individual was concerned that they'll have young people coming to sort out their house instead of going to prison, that they'll be the recipient of unwanted gifts of food, and in particular will be forced to wear a paper hat and play bingo. So here you are. So we infantilise older people, and we take away their sense of autonomy and control. I want to focus on a couple of issues for my last 10 minutes and use this slide, first of all, to illustrate some of the issues that I've been working on. And this is a standard. So one of the things we have, all old people are ill. All old people suffer from chronic illnesses, end of. Well, this is data about prevalence of disability by age, and you can certainly see there's an age-related trend. But even when we get up here, disability is not universal. And this is a good example of raising some questions with you that we might want to think about. Yes, we can see that this is that there's an age-related increase, but is this caused by ageing? Do these people up here have high rates of disability because of the privation that they experienced when they were young people, and that when we get these guys down here, when they get to old age, they may well show lower rates of health problems. So that's one of the really intellectually interesting parts of studying ageing, is to try and tease out what you see demonstrated by older people is actually the result of ageing, and what is the result of all these other cohort effects and the experiences of those particular generations. And when we're thinking about the burden that older people are going to place upon us in the future, which is the rhetoric we get a lot of, then we are just assuming that these guys down here will show this level of disability when they get there. They may show less because they've been well looked after in youth and midlife, or they may show more because they're the generation eating McDonald's and are all massively overweight. So we actually don't really know what the health experiences of older people will be like in the future. I think one of the other great tendencies gerontologists had, and one of the things I was extremely interested in studying, is around how issues of class and gender experience ageing. So again, we get this view that once you come to be 65 or 60 or 70, all these dimensions of social difference, ethnicity, class, gender are magically erased, and we all become the same, which is clearly not the case. So as well as people from class 5, these are people down here, as well as them living less likely to reach retirement age. So this group, the average life expectancy at birth would be about 60, 65, and when they've got there, they can expect to live for another 13 years. If you're up here, you're a barrister or a lawyer or possibly a university professor, not only is your life expectancy at birth about 85, you're then going to clock up another 20 years. I'm not quite sure where to put myself on there. So it's important that old age is not a homogeneous experience. The inequalities that we experience in earlier phases of the life course are carried on. So these are South Wales miners in Bedwas, where my father came from, and this is the Queen. And you might expect that perhaps their resources that they take into old age are rather different. And although this sounds blindingly obvious now, 15, 20 years ago, it was less so. The other areas I've been interested in working in are around what we might call new ageing populations. So we now have, thanks to improvements in medicine and healthcare, people who would have died at previous times in infancy and childhood now reaching old age. This is somebody with Down syndrome. This is, we have people with cystic fibrosis who you never bothered to send to school because frankly they weren't going to live very long, now reaching into their 30s. So thinking about the future cohorts of old age are going to be more diverse than current. And this is just a quotation from a group that I've been particularly interested in, which is people who migrated from South Asia to Britain in the post-war period. I won't read out all the quote because of time, but essentially this is a woman aged 52 saying basically it's all over, I'm decrepit, it's finished. And that reflects the inequalities experienced by that population, but also her frame of reference. In Bangladesh, life expectancy when she left was probably about 50. So it's very important to understand the context within which people are aging. My colleagues from BIAS will have seen some of these before, so they can have 40 winks. I think one of the other things we do is that we attribute particular problems to old age that actually have a more universal appeal, and therefore we neglect to study some of the groups. This is a book that was published in 1947, and it's about, and making a quotation about loneliness. And effectively, the argument here is, first of all, it's difficult to measure, we won't go down that, but it's a particular problem of older people. And one of the papers I'm just about to publish in, oh, why has it done that? Okay, oh. Help? One of the papers that's just about to be published or is published in Aging and Society. If you don't have a subscription, please get one. Starving author and editor needs your money. Is with a colleague, Kemming Yang, we've been looking at loneliness across the life course. And as you concentrate on the groups here, you can see, yes, loneliness actually has a rather U-shaped distribution. It isn't something that is just for older people, but actually there's a blip down here with young adults, particularly, I think, young people going to university, getting their first job, leaving their secure social networks. So it's important that we don't neglect to look at some problems from a broader perspective. Loneliness is not a normal part of aging, but it isn't a problem that's exclusive to older people. And one of my interests that I was funded by ESRC to look at, which I'm very grateful for, was to look at how loneliness rates have changed over time. So this is a survey conducted in 1948, this is conducted in 1954, this was done in 2005. And there's a lot of discourse about how older people are neglected by their families, older people are not part of society, and I'm happy to discuss that perhaps over dinner. But actually, if you look at people's levels of social engagement using this as an indicator, there is no real difference in the extent of loneliness amongst older people in Britain over the last 60 years. And that's important because, again, we need to be aware of how social relationships and social engagement are changing as people grow older. Okay, you'll be pleased to know that I'm within 3 slides of finishing, so dinner is not very far away. So here are some amusing cards that I've got about aging and older people. And you could argue that they serve a function by making us laugh and help us secure, be less afraid of old age. But I want to raise and conclude on a kind of serious point, which is this idea of ageism. Ageism is the last acceptable prejudice. We're not allowed to be sexist, and for a good reason. And racism is unacceptable. But ageism we tolerate. And we tolerate it in a number of ways. And we have prejudicial attitudes towards older people, old age, and the aging process. It's spelt incorrectly because this is a quote from Robert Butler. They can't quite work out how to spell aging in the States. And I think this is really important because unless something dreadful happens to the public health system, we're all going to grow old. Okay? I can probably never experience racism, but I am going to grow old, and all of us will. And I think this is a really important issue for those of us who are interested in old age and later life, and those of us who are involved in educating, particularly health and social care professionals. Because I'm sorry that my technical assistant didn't quite photograph this accurately. I'll have words with him when I get home. But at the end of October, we had this report. This was the CQC report on standards of dignity and nutrition in 100 NHS hospitals. And 55% were non-compliant with the standards or gave cause for concern. I'm pleased to see that my local hospital in Guildford is splendid, so I shall book my bed there ready. Now, this was in the newspaper on the Thursday. Friday, it had gone. Last week, we had yet another report from the Patients Association with the NHS failing to offer basic care to older people in hospital. So these are isolated incidents, you ask. But no, we go back and look through that well-known source of medical information, the Daily Mail. You can see there have been endless headlines, there have been endless reports on older people going hungry in care homes, people being left to die, the standard of care in care homes, and particularly here, doctors being forced to prescribe drinking water to older people because the care in the hospital they were receiving was so shabby. And I would suggest that this is a little more, it is a complete scandal. We would not tolerate these kinds of extensive, repetitive, generic failures for care for young people. We have the exception, we have clearly incidents of abuse, but these are systematic and they're continuing all the time. And I would argue represent rampant ageism, negative valuing of older people and vulnerable older people by those whose job it is to care for them. And I will conclude with a quotation from Alex Comfort, who is well writing The Joys of Sex, so that's my final reference before dinner, also wrote a book called A Good Old Age. He was a very interesting character. And I think this is a call to all of us who are engaged and interested in aging and age research and in the education of health and social care professionals, because it is up to us. We tolerate the abuses that are reported by the CQC, and if we don't do something about it, then that will be our fate when we grow old. Thank you.
We seem to have got our approach towards tackling the issues of ageing rather distorted. At a British Science Association conference a few years ago, very interesting day discussing these issues, and one of the speakers talked enthusiastically about how people might be able to live to 150, and perhaps the first person to live to that age was already born. And the general view of people expressed was, look, we don't necessarily want to live 150. What we want to be able to do is live to, say, 90 or 100 and be fit and healthy for the whole of that period. Yeah. Why are we not tackling sufficiently these diseases? Just one point as far as I'm concerned. I'm almost 80. I have no serious health problems apart from some growing problems of arthritis. But the drugs that I'm suggesting might be available to relieve the discomfort are also likely to increase the risk of heart conditions and cancer. Yes. So I'm in a bit of a cleft stick. Yes. Why are we not as a society devoting more effort, more money, given that the care of older people is costing so much to society? Why are we not devoting more effort to try and remedy what are not necessarily real diseases, but simply matters that arise as a result of some problems with increasing age? Thank you
very much. Good question. Yes, why aren't we? Well, ageing, despite the rhetoric from funding bodies and funding councils I don't know, Mary and I are old enough to have seen umpteen of these calls say, ageing is the new priority. Ageing research gets not as much priority as many other conditions, both in terms of understanding the basic biology, which is outside of my experience, but also it's very difficult, I think, for diseases such as arthritis, which don't kill you, but they really mess up your quality of life. They're difficult diseases to study, and they're not as sexy. They don't kill you. I think that you could argue, if you wanted to, that the drug companies don't think they'll make as much money out of them. They're much harder to research because they don't have such hard endpoints. Why do we have endless cancer trials? Because it's dead easy to work out whether cancer drugs have worked. You're dead or you're alive. When you're trying to study some of these chronic diseases, it's much more problematic to decide whether they've worked or not. But and these are sort of personal prejudices rather than perhaps well-argued facts. I think it's just not seen as a priority. If you want to raise money for medical research, it's children or intensive care. It's high-tech gadgetry. It's not older people or people with learning disabilities who are, I think, not seen as being as valuable as other members of the community.
I am very keen on exercise as well, running and doing all sorts of things. But what can you do about the mind, the psychology of it all? How can you stay positive even though the years increase?
I should let a psychologist answer that, really. How do you stay positive? Well, partly we have, people have different personalities, and to some degree I guess you age with your personality. But partly, how can you stay positive when society establishes a whole pile of barriers that stop you from participating, that have very negative attitudes towards you, that doesn't provide a public transport system that means that you can access the kinds of facilities that would make you active and engaged. So I think partly it's to do with your own psyche, but partly it's to do, I think, with the way we organise society, the way we value some groups and enable other groups not to participate as much as the rest.
Yeah, thanks for a very interesting talk. But I was wondering whether in your work you'd ever delved into the impact on life expectancy of the tremendous changes that we've seen over the last few decades in society. We get very many more people now living alone, many more families breaking up, that kind of thing. I was wondering whether you'd factored any of those things in to your studies.
No, but living alone is one of my pet subjects, so I can talk about that. I think there isn't a sound evidence base, particularly about how changes in people's living arrangements or social circumstances influence life expectancy, because it's all tied up with people who end up living alone because they're widowed, are older, with more health problems. So it's very difficult to disentangle some of those factors. But I think we do need to be very cautious when we're thinking about people living alone as being a bad outcome. You could turn this onto your head, turn it onto its head and say, first of all living alone does is describe how you live. So you live by yourself. It doesn't mean to say that you're socially isolated. It doesn't mean to say that you don't have family and friends living nearby. It doesn't mean to say that you aren't in contact with your relatives. And in fact, if you wanted to be provocative, you could say that actually living alone is a triumph of independence for older people. They don't have to go and live with their relatives or their odious son-in-law and fill in and cope with the kids and the cat and the dog and all the rest of it. They can actually live by themselves, live their own lives in the way that they wish to.
Thanks, Christina. That was a really great talk. Very, very interesting. A lot of what you were talking about was about sort of what I would call the really elderly people, the ones who are unfortunate enough to get stuck in hospital beds and not given drinks. I'm a group that I think is being increasingly stigmatized, which is a baby boomer. And I suspect there's a lot of us in this room. And I'm actually a bit scared because I've noticed that in the last sort of year or so, there's been an awful lot of scapegoating of my age group and blaming us for things like house price inflation and lack of jobs, and we're now accused of house blocking because
Yes,
we do live alone.
Shameful.
And we might have more than one bedroom in our houses, and this is a terrible thing. And because we grew up in perhaps a more prosperous era, we're the ones that are being blamed for all the current problems. And I'm just wondering if there's going to be a time when we're accused of being selfish to continue being alive. And when you think of all the, the things about sort of euthanasia and all this sort of thing, I'm quite afraid that when I get to about 80s, I'm just going to give me a lethal injection. So I just wondered what you thought about that.
Well, certainly, I think the debates around the baby boomers are really very interesting, and David Willett's book is a good example of that you are selfish creatures who've hoovered up all the good things in life, and the generations either side of you have had a really bad time either supporting you or supporting you in both ways, I guess. I mean, certainly Baroness Warnock's view, and there are some philosophers who feel that older people, when you get to a certain age, should do the decent thing and stop consuming resources, and off you go. Thank you very much. But not an argument I would agree with. But there's certainly Baroness Warnock's views caused a lot of controversy, particularly people who had dementia should basically be dispatched, which doesn't seem to me to be the mark of a humane, caring society.
That I'm happy I'm not the only one that failed its first DAD 11 plus exam in 1943. I take the view in life that I have a strong faith, and I've come to the conclusion we are a long time dead, a short time alive, so one should make use of every living moment we've got, and this has helped me in my life.
Quite.
Do you want to endorse that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And if you swim, it will be even better.
Yes. You've still got time. They're open until
Yeah,
9 o'clock.
I do believe lane swimming is on at...
Thank you, Christina. That was absolutely wonderful. Actually, mine is more of a statement, just a good news story. Since I've been mayor, within 3 months, I actually went to 600th birthday parties. 1 man, 5 women, just to do the emphasis bit. But 3 of those women lived at home, relatively independently. And the last one I went to, her family lived in Canada, and they all came over for her party. And her daughter was telling me she was terribly concerned because she was thinking, I've only got 2 days when I get there to organise the party. And her neighbour rang and said, please don't worry, I've taken my laptop over. Your mum has organised all her own party. She's ordered everything from Marks and Spencer's. And we did have an absolutely damn good party. So it was great. So that's just a good news bit,
and I think centenarians are both academically really interesting. What is it about certain people that mean that they live
she
very
was
long?
absolutely amazing. Yeah.
And I mean, I know you all think I'm obsessed with swimming, which is, of course, entirely the case. And you're very lucky that I didn't give you the lecture on 50-metre swimming pools in Great Britain that I have visited over the last 30 years. But in swimming, we keep world records for people aged 100 and over. Mm-hmm. And at my swimming club, we have a 98-year-old who in fact is having a sabbatical from swimming at the moment because he's broken every world record. He's waiting until he's 100. And
he's going to try again. Well done to him.
I'm going to take one more question, and I'm going to give Christina a break. Gentleman at the back.
Professor Victor, I live in West Sussex, and quite by chance yesterday I attended a lecture which accompanied the publication of a booklet which shows an analysis of medical and dental records in West Sussex from the mid to the end of the 19th century. And the complexity of issues are very great. And what it revealed was that in spite of the fact that the people living in the country lived under terrible conditions, which were revealed by photography, which had become available by then, and that the people moving into towns lived in fine Victorian and Georgian houses, the life expectancy of country dwellers was considerably higher than that of the towns.
Yeah.
And that's almost certainly down to the poor water supplies
Yeah.
in the town and the pollution. But the mental health problems in the countryside were hugely greater than those in the towns. And I guess that was due to isolation.
Well, I was going to say a very flippant thing, that it was inbreeding because they couldn't move out, but perhaps I shouldn't say that. I mean, it's certainly true. I think we should celebrate ageing because it is a triumph of public health, and not be so negative about it. I don't want to go back to a time where we didn't have proper sanitation and running water. In fact, I've had to give up going to festivals now because I've clearly reached that age where 5-star hotels and ensuite facilities for me. But I think it is, every time we're down about population ageing, I think that denigrates the importance of public health. And this is another little passion of mine, is that medicine is a very important discipline, but public health is a really important and undervalued part of it, because these are the guys who stand between us and Ebola virus. They're the guys who stand between us and dysentery, cholera, and life expectancy will plummet if we lose those skills.
Christina, thank you very much. This is now the moment where I make sort of trivial, witty remarks about your lecture, which I'd start off by saying it was superb, so don't listen to a word I've got to say. But also, because you were so resonant about stereotyping and ageism, I've had to delete 3 of the things that I was going to say. Now, the one observation is that, first of all, you had that slide of the woman with the gun, and you said she had the status of being the world's oldest suicide bomber. And I thought that was an oxymoron, because clearly she's not very good at it.
She's not very old now.
Yeah. The other one is, and this I'm going to do a bit of referred stereotyping here, which is, when I was a young sociologist, I did have some lectures in gerontology. And my lecturer, who did happen to be a man, said that the reason women lived longer than men was not because men did more dangerous jobs, nor because women were more biogenetically superior, but because women wanted the last word. It wasn't a lecture, I just made that up, right? Because he got a good laugh, okay. Right. Now, the other thing is, I've got some personal observations, which I think are okay because they're about me. These are observations about getting old. And the observation from the inside is that ageing is not true.
Yeah.
That is, I suspect all of you, except for the ones that are younger than that, feel that you're probably about 30. Yeah, and there's nothing anybody can do about that. And that's the inside. Right? Then there's the outside, which is that I take my 30-year-old body into public transport, and a young woman stands up and I think, oh, I've still got that power. And she offers me a seat. Yeah, and I realise something's happening on the outside. Right? So I guess I turned it into a sort of philosophical issue, which is that for the first half of my life, my beautiful body and dynamic body dragged my mind around from pleasure drome to pleasure drome. Right? And then for the second half of my life, my brilliant mind has to drag my body around from commitment to commitment. And that's why you get so tired. Yeah. I suppose the other thing that's desperately depressing is when you go to the doctors. And you sit down, I've got a lovely, and she is slightly younger than me, but whenever I've got this, and she says age-related. Age-related. I'd had this 3 times. I don't mean I go to the doctor all the time, but it's age-related. So I went in once, and she said, what is it? And I said, I think I've got age-related influenza. You just do attend to that. And I suppose I'd conclude with a wonderful moment just about this kind of existential sense of aging and not aging. Yeah. Some of you will remember, those of you old enough will remember Hancock's Half Hour and so on. And there was one episode where he was stuck in a lift. And he began to panic. And John Le Mesurier, who was playing, I don't know, a general or something, said to him, pull yourself together, man of your age. And Hancock said, I am not a man of my age. And I think that's salutary. Christina, I think that was a wonderful lecture, and I think you deserve yet another round of applause. Thank you.